Welcome everyone to part 2 of the Deep Fried Draft Show. My name is Brian Bosarge. We got through earlier with Billy Rossetti talking about the Rams and Panthers. Now we're going to talk about the Cleveland Browns, potentially one of the favorites in the AFC this year. And who better to talk about the Browns than my old running mate here from the Senior Bowl, Mr. Pete Smith from SI Browns. Pete, how are you doing, man?
I'm good. It's always nice to be able to say that I'm, if nothing else, I'm always doing better than the Bengals.
Well, we'll see. My passenger seat was feeling kind of lonely this year during the Senior Bowl, man. Normally, I'm carrying you around everywhere in Mobile, but didn't have you down here this year.
Yeah, obviously the pandemic was a big factor in it, and it turns out that the Browns still took a handful of players that participated this year. That obviously would have been nice to go down there and watch that. But we'll see what's going to happen this coming year. Hopefully, I will be able to get back down there.
And we're going to talk about one of those in particular a little bit later. But we're going to start out at the top, the 26th pick, Greg Newsome. How surprised were you that the Browns didn't have to move up and he just fell right into their lap?
I would say on the outside, like before the draft, I would say it was definitely a surprise. As the draft got going and certain teams decided to do really stupid things, it became sort of more reasonable. And then, once we got to the Titans and they took Caleb Farley, I thought that they had the clear path. They at least considered moving up to 21, and no one would have blamed them. They still would have said it was a great job. But you got to give credit to Andrew Berry for the discipline he showed by being willing to sort of hold his water there, get the guy he wanted, and not have to give up anything to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I had talked, the talk was like, okay, if J.C. Horn slips or Patrick Surtain slips, then that's when you pounce into the late teens or whatever. But no, those guys were gone in the top 10, both of them. I don't think, a lot of people really had that going that way. And so the Browns get their man, arguably the third best corner prospect in this draft at 26.
Right. Arizona was the one I thought may take him, and then they decided to take a 270-pound linebacker, I guess is going to be an edge rusher for them. So that really knocked two birds with one stone for me. One, I didn't want him on the Browns, and two, they didn't take Greg Newsome. So, if you watched Greg Newsome at Northwestern, he plays the way he played there basically the same way I think the Browns want to employ him. He off man, some zone stuff, and then tight man coverage. He does everything that this defense would seemingly want them to do. That's the same type of man Denzel Ward plays. Those are playing to his strengths. So obviously the big question for him, can he stay healthy? He's had some issues with that. He's yet to play a full season, but he is really good, really disciplined as a cover corner. One of the knocks for him is that he only had one interception in his career. And that's largely because he was so focused on doing exactly what he was coached to do that he wasn't trying to get interceptions. And the one he did get, he played it perfectly in terms of the coverage. The quarterback threw the ball super late, and he basically, caught it in self-defense.
You didn't really hear a lack of interception production when people talked about J.C. Horn, but if it wasn't for Bo Nix, I'm not sure J.C. Horn would have had a career interception either. That's part of a product of teams never threw at him. They always targeted McQuamu and others, but, that didn't really come up with Horn.
No, and, South Carolina wins that game. Bo Nix, should be co-MVP. He threw away, 3 interceptions, and they still had a chance to win at the end, and then he scrambled on 4th down for nothing as the clock ran out. So, and that was probably the game that really propelled J.C. Horn too, not just because he made the interception, but obviously the job he did against Seth Williams.
Right. Hey, let's not disparage the 2-8 should have been Gasparilla Bowl participant South Carolina Gamecocks last year.
Yeah, I mean, you only get so many cracks at the proverbial Gasparilla that they missed that opportunity, and unfortunately, that was due to COVID. Otherwise, they were there.
Yeah, I was so glad to not have to watch that game that morning. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. A guy they drafted in the second round, traded up to get as a guy. If they had taken him at 26, I don't think anybody would have really been shocked by it. Is Jeremiah Owusu-Cory Moore from Notre Dame, probably a linebacker safety hybrid mix. How's he going to fit in with the Browns?
Right. So they're calling him a will linebacker. I don't think he's going to be a will linebacker, at least not going to be fully a will linebacker. If you watch him, he does so many things in that rover role that he played at Notre Dame really well. He's really good in the slot, really good as that overhang or off the edge type guy. He can take away rollouts or running lanes going outside. He's really good in the flat. But he's going to play dime backer. He's going to play some nickel linebacker. I just don't foresee a situation where they're going to be saying, yeah, it's, 1st and 10. We expect them to run the ball, get out there and do it inside linebacker. He's probably closer to 215 pounds than the 221 he was at his pro day. I think he was pretty watered down for that. But in terms of where the league is going, and particularly where the Browns are going, they want to be faster. They want to be able to cover better. He fits all of those things really, really well. So I think he's going to end up being sort of a hybrid rover coverage option who can just play fast and just cause havoc. He goes 52nd. I heard Dane Brugler talking about how teams weren't concerned about his heart. They just didn't have they didn't have like the full story on the heart, just by virtue of the fact that some of these guys' medical records didn't get out the way they had hoped. So some of these teams just didn't know that he was sort of cleared, and that's part of the reason he fell. I also think part of it was just there are teams that just look at a guy like him and they go, we don't have a spot for him unless you want to put him as a strong safety. That doesn't make sense. For example, I don't think the Bengals were a team that they weren't really in position to pick him, but I don't think they were ever in consideration to sort of be like, yeah, that would be a guy that fits in our defense. And I think that was an issue for a lot of teams. Going into the draft, everybody's really confident he'd go in the first round. It was really difficult to sort of place him in the first round because there aren't that many teams that have this sort of, this willingness to go that route, and the Browns clearly are.
Right. A lot of people, they throw around when they do these profiles on draft prospects, they use that term track speed. They use it very loosely. And to quote Princess Bride, I don't think you know what that word means. But with Anthony Schwartz, it's legit track speed. I mean, this guy probably could have qualified for the 2021 Olympics if he focused on track his entire collegiate career. But you're getting a guy who at minimum is a 4.27 40 guy. But how quickly can he actually help this offense? Because, he wasn't much of a polished product coming out of Auburn.
No, he's raw. He's 20. I mean, he won't be 21 until like September. I think November. This team has drafted nothing but young players in 2 years, and he's the youngest. But he is really fast. And just the second you put him on the field, somebody has to account for him. I think he's going to create space on the field that they desperately needed, especially when they lost Odell Beckham last year. They did a lot stretching teams horizontally. They just did not have that true vertical downfield threat. I don't expect he's going to play a ton. He may be inactive for a couple games, but if he's active, I think he's going to play about 15 reps, on offense a game. He may well end up being a gunner because he's not small. He's almost 190 pounds at 6 foot. But when he's on the field, I fully expect they're going to take a deep shot to him, and they're going to use him in sort of that joker role that Auburn used him. And, Gus Malzahn got fired essentially for Bo Nix, despite, having basically more wins against Alabama than the rest of that pitiful conference. So they use him in a lot of different ways: jet sweeps, fly sweeps, quick screens, slip screens, all that type of stuff. Manufacturing touches for him just to get him the ball potentially with space in front of him. Those are all things that I think Stefanski would like to do. I truly believe that, when Rondale Moore went off the board, that's when the Browns basically got on the phone and made the move up. I think they would have, maybe they still would have taken Owusu-Koramoah, but I think they really, really liked Rondale Moore for the same reasons. When Stefanski was coaching the Minnesota Vikings, he wasn't the offensive coordinator, but with that double tight end offense, your third receiver doesn't necessarily need to be this polished guy. You can sort of use a real weapon there. And when he was there, they had Cordero Patterson, who no one was, confusing for a polished receiver, but he was a guy that put the ball in his hands, and then he causes damage. He's great kick returner, all those type of things. So I think that's some of the magic that they want to try to capture with Schwartz. Certainly it's a little bit of a volatile pick. I think in 3 years, it wouldn't be a huge surprise if Schwartz is a really good player. I also don't think it would be a huge surprise if he just wasn't much of anything, just because of the areas he has to work on. But the Browns have the capacity to really work with him. They obviously had really good success last year, taking a player in Donovan Peoples-Jones, who was barely coached at Michigan. He had a productive rookie season, so I think there's a lot of the same thought process in there. Again, may not see a ton of the field early, but when he's out there, I think he can make a couple big plays for the Browns this season and be that highlight guy, that takes the top off the defense, which he did all of one time last year because their passing game was so disjointed.
Pitiful conference, he said.
Well, as far as beating Nick Saban goes, yes, pitiful.
I know you're a big proponent of athletic testing, and that's definitely rubbed off on me and hanging out with you over the last 4 or 5 years. 4 of the 5 Browns draft picks outside of the top 3 there, Cincinnati offensive tackle James Hudson, West Virginia linebacker Tony Fields, Georgia safety Richard LeCounte, and UCLA running back receiver Demetric Felton all tested poorly at their pro days, but yet the Browns took them anyway. Did that kind of surprise you?
Yes and no. I think this is a nod to the fact that the Browns, like a number of teams, are invested in GPS data. Almost immediately after LeCounte was picked and Felton was picked, Daniel Jeremiah with LeCounte was saying, he tested 90th percentile in game speed during the season. And then Demetric Felton had, the fastest time speed at the Senior Bowl. Whether it's actually, the chips like the Senior Bowl is using, or just being able to, basically do it on the computer and basically, clip and time how long it takes a player to go from point A to point B. I think that's really a nod to that. It doesn't mean that pro day testing doesn't matter, but it does suggest that teams like Browns are basically saying, he had a horrible day testing. Like Demetric Felton tested like he was carrying around 50 pounds on his back. Like, it's awful. The chart I'll have when I do his prospect profile from James Coburn, he's barely on it. So I think it's more of a just different types of data. I do think part of this was the weirdness of this year. I think the combine, when it's back in whatever form it's going to be, will still be a huge, huge deal because it's still an apples to apples comparison. But it just says we have other ways to sort of measure this. If it doesn't look good at pro day, maybe we can go back and find something. And it's possible some of these players basically just said, screw it, we're not even going to worry about it. Sure, we'll go out there. In the case of LeCounte, he wasn't fully recovered from a car accident he suffered where he was on a dirt bike on Halloween, and he said he basically just got fully healthy from his foot. So that's sort of the more direct example. Just watching James Hudson, he certainly seems more athletic than the testing would suggest. So that's going to be interesting, particularly with Felton. When they get to mini camps and some of those things, how's he going to look? Because he's, again, more reason I believe they really like Rondale Moore. He's basically the same dimensions. But if he's slow and that small, he's going to get killed pretty quickly, and his NFL dreams will be over if he can't move fast. So it's going to be pretty evident pretty quickly to see if that's even going to be a thing.
I know in specifically with Richard LeCount, he had my second highest tape grade of any safety in this class behind Trevin Morey. I loved LeCount on tape, and when I saw his pro day results, I'm like, man, I couldn't believe it. But when I almost just assumed that he wasn't recovered from the accident, and that makes it more palatable, I guess. And in terms of Demetric Felton, I mean, I'm sure you watched the senior role practice videos as well. I mean, this guy looked dynamic out in the open field, and then they had the mile per hour, 19.7 mile an hour or something on the field, and then he comes out of his pro day, and it's like you can't believe what you're seeing when you got the numbers.
Yeah, a couple months ago, revisiting this, Albert Breer of the MMQB did basically a combine prediction type thing. If they had a combine, who would win specific events, and he picked Anthony Schwartz to win the 40, but he picked Felton to win the shuttle. Like, that was the expectation, and he tested like a 4.5 at pro day. So, clearly something doesn't match up there, and that's what happens when you get an awful pro day like this. You go back to the tape if you thought somebody was really athletic, and you go check it out. Now, with that extra data, with that GPS stuff, you can actually get numbers spit out at you to make it pretty clear what you're seeing, and he plays full speed on the field. LeCount's interesting to me. Not a great tackler, not good in that aspect of it. He's not a good run defender, but he had like 7 interceptions in the last 20 games he was on the field, and he's good in coverage, which is something that's important to the Browns. So it'll be interesting if he's right and what that looks like. He may end up competing with a spot with Sheldrick Redwine for that job, potentially, unless again, they look at JOK and Tony Fields as sort of an extension of that safety room where they feel comfortable with potentially keeping 2 of those deeper guys since they're more towards the line of scrimmage. That'll be interesting. But yeah, they obviously they like what LeCount brings. He's an entertaining guy. He's funny. And they like his leadership and some of the other things. And in the case of LeCount, in the case of Fields, I believe both of them graduated in 3 years. Fields went to be a graduate transfer at West Virginia after playing at Arizona. So they took a bunch of smart guys.
Can't go wrong with that. I know that your Venn diagram of Browns fans and Ohio State fans probably has a pretty large meet in the middle there. So I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions about Tommy Togiai, the defensive lineman they drafted in the 5th round. Sure.
Not a great year for Ohio State in terms of prospects. Once you get past Justin Fields, their defense was awful for much of the year, but the defensive line was the one thing they had that was consistently effective. Togiai in so many ways is just this, barely figuring himself out, and having the shortened season due to the pandemic hurt him quite a bit, I think, because he hasn't played 300 snaps in a college year yet. And I think in a normal year like this season, I think he would have had more games to sort of figure himself out and continue sort of blossoming as a player, because he did get better as the season wore on. He's only 21. He's very athletic, just tremendous agility, but he's got real strength. He's going to play a 3. Maybe he may rush from a nose, but it wouldn't surprise me if Togiai is somebody that doesn't play much this year. We'll see what happens in camp, but he's just got a lot of developing to do, and some of that's just you haven't seen it happen on the field. There's little to sort of go off of. Obviously, if he comes out and he's great in training camp, they'll put him in the lineup. But just given where he is in his development and some of the stuff that I think he will get better with, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a guy who's routinely inactive on game days. And we get fans that are basically going, why isn't this guy playing? And it's really just because they had a great opportunity. I doubt they thought he was going to be available when they took him. And they can sort of stash him away because they do have a lot of defensive tackles right now. They may keep 5 this year. So it doesn't put as much pressure on him to play as maybe last year would have. And I think he could end up being the 5th guy in the depth chart in terms of readiness and ability to sort of contribute right now.
Speaking of defensive tackles, the Browns spent big money in the undrafted market on Marvin Wilson, a guy who is probably was a much higher thought of player before last season, and then his last 2 seasons of play have kind of steadily gone down. What are the chances Marvin Wilson makes any sort of dent in this roster?
If he stays healthy, I think he'll make it, and I think he'll contribute. That's the big thing. Is his body right? Because when he's good, when he's healthy, when he's out there playing, at 100% or close to it, he has massively strong hands. He can throw guys out of the way. He can 2-gap really well, and he can get after the quarterback in a way that that interior pressure, clogging the escape lanes, sort of collapsing the pocket, and all that good stuff. I think healthy, he's way better than the tub of crap the Bengals took to play nose. He doesn't have a massive weight issue. There's nothing like that. So again, if Marvin Wilson's not healthy, I don't think this thing's going to go very long. That's been the issue. He hasn't played a full college season. He didn't finish the last 2 seasons. He left the Senior Bowl early because he nicked up something. So that's the question. And even the injuries he had have some question marks. Like, he had a hand injury that ended his season. It's unclear what he did to the hand. It's unclear which hand he hurt. He ended last season with a quote-unquote leg injury. He supposedly had surgery on it. We don't know what he did, and we don't know which leg it was on. So there's a lot of sort of gray area. I really like him as an undrafted free agent. I don't think I would have – I think as a day 3 pick, it's totally defensible. But when people were talking about him as potentially a day 2 guy, that's all I could see is a guy that just – yes, there are flashes, but in terms of that production, that the just being able to finish wasn't great, and his athletic testing wasn't great either. He's fast, he's got good speed, which I think is something that the Browns really like from him. But I think he fits the exact type of nose they want. So if he stays healthy, I think he's the perfect guy to put behind Andrew Billings in this defensive scheme. And I think he could absolutely be a splash player, which I don't think the kid the Bengals took will be.
Now, I actually, when I saw Kyrie Tonga from BYU get drafted in the 7th round, I'm like, I would have rather had that than Tyler Shelvin. Yeah,
the Mormons will break your heart, man. I loved him on tape, and then you get the cruel news that he's 25 years old because he served on a Mormon mission. They have some phenomenal players. I did this twice this year, and I know better. I fell in love with the Simi Fehoko, who Dallas took, and it was like, he's a true junior. This is gonna be great. He's 21. He's this deep threat. I can live with this stuff. He's enormous. He's 24. Like Jake Claypool, and then he's basically 24 years old. God bless them because they're doing what they do. But from a football standpoint, it's not great for me.
Have you ever seen the movie Basketball?
Yes.
All right. At the beginning when they're talking about guys playing free agency, and you have the guy who goes through the list of teams that he spent a season at the Desert Inn or whatever as a manager. This reminds me now of what Jadeveon Clowney's become. Basically a mercenary for hire here for teams on defense. Brown signed him about a week or so before the draft. What kind of impact are you expecting from Clowney this year?
If you're talking about box scores, I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be, he's never had a double-digit sack season. I don't know if it's going to change here. But in terms of what he does for the scheme and what they want to do, huge, absolutely huge. He does some of the same things that J.J. Watt does when they pursued him. You put him at defensive end, and he owns that spot on the field. He wins at the point of attack. He can push the line backwards, and he can protect that second level, which with what the Browns did is incredibly important. I thought JOK was a better fit once they got Clowney because of that exact reason. So they have him and Myles Garrett on the edges that are both these long, strong edge guys. And then, when they get into nickel packages, they can easily put Clowney inside where he's arguably a better player, particularly as a pass rusher. And now he's an explosive, strong player where you basically find the turd inside. And with the Bengals, there are many to pick from. And you just let him create problems. Like if they put that center from Georgia in, park him right there, and we'll be in good shape. So it's just a massive element to what they could do because now they signed Takir McKinley, and I don't know who honestly thought that they were actually going to be like, yeah, we're going to start him, but he now becomes that designated pass rusher, speed off the edge. There's at least positive talk about Curtis Weaver, who they stole off the Dolphins. Maybe he's a guy who can come in, but now you've got all these defensive tackles. Malik Jackson, I watched him play against the Bengals last year when he was a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. He hit poor Joe Burrow 4 times. So they have all these guys who can line up and just kill Joe Burrow. Obviously Myles Garrett sacked him a couple times. I think Clowney can do some damage. Malik Jackson. Now you've got Takk McKinley. You have these guys like Jordan Elliott and potentially Tommy Togiai, Marvin Wilson, and they drafted a bunch of furniture to try to block, and I don't know if that's going to work.
Why can't you say he's going to hit Ben Roethlisberger or Lamar Jackson? Why's it got to be Joe Burrow?
Well, they absolutely will hit Ben Roethlisberger. They have patio set at tackles right now, and I really liked the signing of Rashad Coward, like as a potential guy. Like I don't rule him out to take a starting job. You can't be like, nope, Chuck Okorafor and Zach Banner, we're good. Like they had Tevin Jenkins sitting there, and I guess there were some medical questions and maybe some character with him. I like the center they got, but you're going to block Myles Garrett with Chuck Okorafor and Zach Banner. I just don't see it, and they're absolutely going to wreck them inside. Najee Harris seems like a genuinely fantastic human being. I wish him nothing but the best. I just don't think he's going to get any blocking, and it's going to be ugly that first year. And so much of what the Steelers are doing seems to be they will do anything and everything to avoid going below 500. It doesn't seem like they have any other plan other than we don't want to go below 500 for whatever streak Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Tomlin have. And I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to be ugly. But, this host of this particular pod isn't a Steelers fan and chose the Bengals. So it's really easy to poke fun at the fact that they picked Jackson Carman and they traded too far down. And yes, they got 2 4th-round picks, but all the guys that were really good went right before they picked. And they got this guy who's a body, and then they took a fat center, and then they took, basically a blocking sled at nose. Looking at it from that standpoint, I pleaded and begged with the Bengals, take Penei Sewell, he's right there. And they said, no, that's not really a scar. That's an error in the photo. That didn't actually happen. And now, even if you put him at guard, he could have been Quentin Nelson maybe in that first year or until he moved him to tackle. And instead, you may have taken what could be, maybe this is the year they got it right. And it's not Cedric Oboye or Jake Fisher or Bodine or, the other 700 players they've taken to the mid rounds and went, no, we know what we're doing this time. We don't need the top end guy. I'm not even convinced that Jonah Williams is good just because he's a pretty good blocker. But when he whiffs, it's bad. It's not even slowing him down, and they're just coming full speed. So, I wouldn't have hurt my feelings in the least if the Bengals had said, look, we're going to take Penei Sewell and then we're going to take Quinn Miners or Creed Humphrey, and said, never again. But instead they decided, and if I'm not mistaken, they could have taken they could have made a little move and taken Penei Sewell and Elijah Moore. How good would that have been for that team? Instead, Jamar Chase probably going to look really good, but Jackson Carman, Trey Hill, we'll see.
I will say this. I do like the potential of Deontay Smith from East Carolina.
He's better than the other two.
Not this year, but for sure, maybe 2022. He takes over for Riley Reef. I think that's the thing that gets me about the national media and everybody. It's easy to make fun of the Bengals, right?
Yes,
but Pittsburgh's offensive line is worse.
Yes,
on paper, it's worse. They pass on all the offensive linemen they could have taken. They draft a damn running back in the first round. Nobody gives him crap for any. Oh, he's the perfect Steeler, Najee Harris. He's the Pittsburgh through and through.
What Collinsworth? Was it Collinsworth or somebody could? I think it was who is it? Damn, I'm forgetting his name. Compared him to Franco Harris. So fresh with the comparisons. Again, that's another team. Tevin J. I'm very curious to know what would have happened if Darisaw was sitting there for the Steelers. Do they still take Najee Harris there, or was Darisaw enough to be like, no, stop it, we're not doing this. We're going to take this excellent offensive tackle prospect. No, the Bengals get crap in part because they deserve it, although they did take the kid I really liked last year out of Kansas, and he looks like he could play, and he kicked into guard just like I thought he would. So I'm curious to see if he ends up as a starter, because I think that's where he could end up ultimately.
He played some snaps at tackle last year. It didn't go. It went about as well as I think we both thought it would go.
Yeah, sure. He was great at guard. Yeah. He was great at guard, and he only did. I don't think he practiced it before the Senior Bowl really, and he was good.
Yeah. Let's get back to the Browns. They're loaded at tight end. The tight end room is very deep. Are they going to keep all these guys, or is Njoku going to get moved before the season starts?
I can't imagine a scenario where Njoku gets moved, only because trading him would only make sense to get a player, and it would probably be a corner, maybe a veteran safety, but a corner really stands out. I think they aren't writing off the idea that they can ultimately extend him next year. If he has a great year, they can afford it. I mean, people are, you can look at their cap and go, oh man, they got a lot coming up. They're going to, shed some money off the cap. They've got a bunch of rollover that's going to pay for some stuff. Yes, they have contracts like Denzel Ward, Baker Mayfield that are going to escalate. They've got to sign Wyatt Teller. They've got to make a decision on Nick Chubb, all these things, but they have ways to create money. And if Njoku is as good as he can be, and he was great in the playoff game against the Chiefs, he was arguably the best player out there. And particularly if Austin Hooper struggles, I think he will have a much better year. I think everybody will have a much better year, basically. But Njoku makes more sense as a long-term investment than either of the receivers right now. They're too cheap, relatively speaking. They're extremely cost efficient, and they just do too much. It's really difficult to cover Austin Hooper and David Njoku at the same time. And sure, they like Harrison Bryant, but he's not an inline guy, at least not yet. I think they're going to do a lot more flexing of guys like Njoku this year because they have the personnel, in addition to being stronger up front, that it's going to create more opportunities to let Njoku become more of a playmaker. And I think the playoff game, or at least I hope the playoff game, is an acknowledgement that they didn't use him enough, that he should have been a bigger part of the offense earlier than he was, especially because after Beckham went down, he's pretty much the fastest guy out there. But I think people are undervaluing how good a player like Njoku can be. Look, Kyle Pitts just went fourth. And if he was there for the Bengals, I can't imagine they would have passed on him. Those type of players are valuable, even though they have a decently long development curve. When they work, they're great. I mean, even if even if Njoku is nothing more than Eric Ebron, which some have pegged him, that's still valuable. So if he can avoid getting hurt first and foremost, and just pick up where he left off, he was a dominating blocker down the stretch, in addition to showcasing himself as a receiver. But he constantly, you mentioned the Steelers giving them crap. He escorted more than a few of them out of the club onto their team's sideline during the playoff game. So he's become really a weapon for them in a number of ways. So I think people get caught up in the idea of trading him. They get caught up in holding this idea that he has never said an ill word about Cleveland. All he's ever basically said is, look, if it's not going to work here, I'd like to go somewhere where I can sort of maximize my value, which is any human being, USA or the world. That's, what you'd want to do. So he works hard. He really paid off last year. So I think he's got far better chances to be here longer term than people would like to believe.
Right on. Last question, and I'll let you get out of here. What's your realistic expectation for the Browns this year? We talking AFC Championship game? We talking Super Bowl? What is realistic for Cleveland in 2021?
Okay, so realistically, they are in the mix for the Super Bowl. They have spent a lot of time upgrading their defense to deal with what the AFC has become, which is a conference full of athletic quarterbacks who can absolutely murder you without even pretending they're running the ball. And if you watch the AFC Championship last year, it was Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and they just basically stopped even faking play action. They just said, screw it. We're going to drop back, run around. If nothing's open, we're going to pick up 10 yards with our legs. And the Browns upgraded their coverage because they got to keep up with guys like what the Chiefs had, and last year they couldn't. They have to keep up with the Bills and their 4 receivers, which are really, really impressive, and they have to be able to put more pressure on the quarterback. So they add Greg Newsome, they add Josh Johnson or John Johnson III, who is a huge piece for this team. They add Troy Hill to cover the slot. They add Takarius McKinley, who can chase down those guys. Jadeveon Clowney can pressure those guys. Myles Garrett obviously can pressure those guys. And now you add guys like Owusu-Koramoah, who's fast enough to track those guys down. You get smaller and quicker. You put a lot of faith in this defensive line that they can protect the second level. So I do think that they should be in the mix for that AFC Championship. It's going to be entirely a question of when do they run into the Bills and or Chiefs at this point. Those are the 2 teams that stand out to me the most, because I don't see another team right now, and the Dolphins are the big wild card on this one because if Tua is suddenly very good, they become a very, very dangerous team. But right now, I think the Browns are no worse than the 3rd best team in the AFC, behind those 2 simply because they've proven it, and the Browns arguably have as much talent as either of those teams.
I can't argue with that. Had Billy Rossetti on earlier the first half of this episode tonight, and his prediction was the Rams and the Browns in the Super Bowl. I mean, I guess that all depends on Matt Stafford hitting his peak there, but I mean, you could definitely see it going either way because the NFC is not exactly beaming with strong teams either at this point. So outside of Tampa Bay,
and then if I don't really believe in the Rams, we have half their secondary. Tampa's got to be the prohibitive favorite. I'm sure one of those teams from the NFC West could emerge as a power. They may beat each other up too much. And then, the Packers, depending on where this thing goes, are great. Like, that's the thing that, that's the one thing I don't get about this whole situation is, one, I ultimately think it will get figured out because they all want to win. And he has to look around and go, yeah, they kept Bakhtiari. They kept the running back I wanted. They kept all these things together. And they did add more talent to this team. I don't love Eric Stokes, but I get it. So if you're looking around going, who's the second best team in the NFC? As long as he's on the field, even if it's after a month. Yeah, he could take the first 4 weeks off if he wanted to. And they're still great. So, yeah, I think the AFC is going to be the more interesting field, but I do think there's a couple top tier teams, and I think in some ways it's sort of a more fun element because it's sort of the Chiefs, and then you've got these two up and comers in the Bills and the Browns that have, obviously the Bills were there last year and the Browns won a playoff game, but it's, who's going to be able to take that next step. And obviously the weirdness of the game last year, the Browns had their chance to win that game. They're probably not going to get lucky with Mahomes going out again, but do they have enough? And the Chiefs, do they have enough defense now? They have some really good players, but is that enough, especially with what the Browns have added? That's going to be sort of the question here. Last year, the Chiefs were basically laughing at the Browns receivers. They play, man with one free safety over the top, and the Browns couldn't do anything about it. You can put Anthony Schwartz out there. They got to move him now. So we'll see. That's really the big question for them.
Good stuff, Pete. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
You can find me on Twitter at @PeteSmith_ and you underscore again. And you can find me at si.com/NFL/Browns for Browns Digest.
Thanks a lot, Pete, for joining me, and hope I'll see you again in January.
I hope you guys finish your construction on various restaurants to make sure that I'm inclined to go.
We'll see. Thanks a lot for joining me, Pete.
You got it.
That was Pete Smith from SI Browns, and you can follow him on Twitter at _Pete Smith _. And you can follow me on Twitter at Deep Fried Draft. Find me in various social media platforms, Deep Fried Draft everywhere. Keep it simple, folks. And subscribe to these videos on YouTube. We got a few more coming up over the next week and a half with various other talking various other NFL teams and their draft stuff. So until next time, tomorrow night, Jeff Risding going to join us. He also does work for the Browns Wire at USA Today. We're going to talk about his other team, the Lions, tomorrow night. So tune in for that. Till next time.